well, ready for coffee.
Now we need now.
So did you get some good exercise shoveling snow?
Oh yeah.
Uh-huh.
A lot.
How about the rest of you guys?
The back smoked.
What?
So the back smoked.
Ah. Yeah. Not me. Well, 2 more minutes and we'll see if anybody else shows up.
You don't have any copy yet? That's the new one. I know this morning there was 5 more copies left, so. Yeah.
Check it out.
You guys get a hold of the catechism book?
I did it.
What was that, Lydia?
Did you get a hold of the catechism book?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. It's worthwhile. So, well, okay, well, let's pray. O heavenly King, comfort of the Spirit of truth, who art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasure of blessings and giver of life, come and abide in us, cleanse us from every impurity and save our souls, O good one. Amen. So, who has questions?
Advice for the Lent fast.
Do your best. The most important thing is you keep your eyes on yourself and not what anybody else does, not what anybody else eats, not what anybody else. That's their business. It's not your business. You just have to keep your eyes on yourself and what you're eating and what you're doing so far as the fast. Everybody's different. Everybody has. So, for example, women who are pregnant and nursing, it's forbidden for them to fast. People who are over 70, they don't have to fast. Some do. If you're one of these super high metabolism guys, where if you miss a meal, you'll fall over. Or if you have certain kinds of diabetes or something, and you'll go into diabetic shock if you don't eat. You're forbidden to fast. You just have to you do your best. Sometimes people will do better keeping a discipline. You need to keep a discipline. And the discipline that the church gives is abstention during Lent itself, abstention from all kinds of meat, all kinds of dairy products, any kind of animal products, fish, alcohol, wine, and oil. That is olive oil. Now, you can still, there are some loopholes. Shrimp, squid, crab, all that kind of stuff is, the fathers considered them to be vegetables. Yeah. So it's very useful. You gotta have one of these.
Got it on my fridge.
Okay, yeah, we govern our life by the calendar. And so, for example, there are various symbols on here that tell you what you can and what you can eat.
There's a hierarchy to those as well, right?
Right.
So for example, if you see one that has fish on it, that also allows everything underneath that, which would be the wine and oil.
Right.
Okay, but if you only see the grapes on there, that means wine and oil, okay, but not fish. So, you know, it's more like moving from, you know, towards meat, okay, between meat.
Yeah, so this week, it's coming week, we're here right now. This is Sunday of the Prodigal Son. It's the second of the pre-Lenten Sundays. Zacchaeus is kind of a pre-Lenten Sunday, but not really, because what it marks is the reading of the Gospel of Zacchaeus marks the end of the cycle of the Gospel readings after Pentecost. And so after the Sunday of the of Zacchaeus, you go into the Publican and Pharisee, which is the first week of the Triodian. And the Triodian starts basically with 2 Sundays. A publican and the Pharisee and the prodigal son. And then a third Sunday, which is the casting of Adam and Eve out of paradise. No, it's the Last Judgment. It's the Last Judgment next. Then there's one further Sunday. So there are 3 weeks in the Triodian this week, or in the let's see, yeah, this Sunday, and the week that follows it, each of which have kind of special fasting rules. Now, after Sunday of the Prodigal Son, which is tomorrow, next week on the 15th we have the meeting of the Lord. And it's one of the great feast days. It's the 40th day after Nativity, where Christ was brought to the temple by his parents. And you have Cheese Week, so you can see it's gray. That means there's no meat. However, you can eat dairy products and eggs and other kinds of such things, along with wine and oil, but every day, including Wednesday and Friday. And then that ends with Cheese Fair Sunday, the last day to eat cheese and dairy products and eggs before Lent. And so, as everything else in the Orthodox Church, it's an excuse for a party. We used to call it Cheesecake Sunday at seminary. But then during the first 3 days of Lent, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the tradition is that after you finish your last meal on Sunday, some people wait until 11 o'clock, you know. But the first 3 days, there's no food served until after a pre-sanctified liturgy, and you've been to communion, and then you can break your fast on Wednesday. So it's a 3-day fast. Some people will fast all the way through Friday. There's no fasting on weekends is always lessened. So you'll see that every Saturday and Sunday it has this little grape thing here. It means it's at least wine and oil. Now, during Great Lent, there's only one day. Well, there's 2 days in which fish can be, in which fish is permitted. People do it whether it's permitted or not. But and that's one of those is on Palm Sunday, and the other is on Annunciation, which this year is on Holy Tuesday. Otherwise, there's no fish. So we got Annunciation on Holy Tuesday, and that's a kind of a unique thing. But actually, according to this, there's no fish even.
Is that because it's Holy Week?
Yeah. So, so you get used to it. It's just a lifestyle change where your diet is prescribed by the calendar. And so now there's another dimension to fasting. That's the dimension of abstinence. The fasting dimension is essentially it's like intermittent fasting. So the ancient rule, which is still the rule in the Coptic and the Ethiopian churches, is that you don't eat until 3 o'clock in the afternoon or thereabouts. And then you basically have one meal. You can have a snack if you want, but normally 3 o'clock is when you in the monasteries is when that meal would be about then. So fast days actually means fasting, means not eating. So that's about I don't know, is it an 18-hour fast? Which is pretty good, you know.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
She's like,
Now, if you're brand new to this, it can be difficult. But it's not like if you cheat on the fast, you're going to go to hell. That's not the idea. It's a discipline that the church specifies, and like everything else, when it comes to canons and disciplines like that, it's about it's a challenge in which you measure your own practice by the church's discipline. So, and for some people, they can actually do the full discipline. Other people can't. It doesn't matter. Some people will do more than the church's discipline. Like for those who will, for example, fast for 3 or 5 days a week during Lent, fully. Just water. You always have to drink water. But there are people who will do that. I got a story about a guy I was at Valam, and the abbot invited me along. We had this whole group of monastic officers. There were the abbots and the treasurers and all of the kind of senior guys from some of the major monasteries in Russia, from Optinapustin, from Trinity St. Sergius-Lavra, and various others. And then there was Pope Nikolai. Pope is a kind of popular way of saying father. It's also slightly crude, because your Pope is your rent. So Pope Nikolai was Ukrainian, and Valam at the time was very strictly dry, absolutely no alcohol. But Pope Nikolai, being an old friend of the abbot, he brought along I think a 2-liter bottle of the Russian equivalent of Everclear, otherwise known in Russian as spirit. And so he would fast all of Lent. All of Lent, not eat at all. He would drink water. I don't know if he drank anything else, but then after after Pascha, he would be, he probably lived on Everclear. You know what Everclear is, right? It's 100% alcohol, 200 proof. Usually, if you do drink it, you mix it with copious quantities of fruit juice or something like that. Well, Pope Nikolai, going into Lent, was a big boy. You know, he's probably about my size. You know, but he would slim down to about, you know, to be pretty svelte, about 150 pounds at the end of Lent. So it was quite funny. Well, anyway, we were. I had a chance to spend time with him, kind of inadvertently, because we had this. It was a feast. It was the monastery feast day in September, September, end of August, and so we took the boat, one of the monastery's large boats, out to Holy Island. It's where there was a saint who lived in a cave there in the 16th century, and the cave is still there. He dug himself a grave, which is still there. And the pilot dropped us off. You know, there were about 15 or 20 of us. Everything went fine. We went around the island, you know, the holy places and things like that. And we could see the boat, which was way off of the next island. Except it wasn't moving. And we had finished. This was before cell phones. Were at least before they were easily available. It was 93. And so, you know, we kind of made the best of it for a while. Then the abbot got worried, and he decided to send a couple of guys in a rowboat about 2 miles to find out what happened. And the guy had run up on the rocks because he was drunk, the pilot of the boat. So these two, they rowed all the way to the boat on the other, at the next island, found out what was going on, and then rowed all the way back. And Ladoga is a huge lake. It's the size of Lake Michigan. And it has tides, it has huge waves in it and things like that. And right where this island, Holy Island there's a strait to the main island, and the waves are normally 6 to 8 feet. The swells are 6 to 8 feet going through there. So that's quite a thing. So he says, well, the guy's not coming. And so he sends these guys to row across the strait to the island with one of the younger novices who will run back to the monastery, 10 miles, to try and tell them to send somebody else. And then they have to row back, you know, and rowing through 6 to 8 foot swells is that's pretty intense. And then they send me as the head of a group of, you know, the foreigner, right, with all of these senior Russian monastic officials. And of course the boat goes up and goes down, and it disappears in between the waves, up and down. So, and it, you know, it's several 200 yards. Anyway, so we had to find our way through the forest of Valam all the way back to 10 miles to the main monastery. Anyway, that was my adventure. But getting to know Pope Nikolai Interesting. Anyway.
And then
Um,
after the
so Holy Week is another time. Is another time when there's some people that fast very intensely. Some people will fast the whole week, and some people will fast Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. What Holy Week is characterized by is the reading of the eschatological or apocalyptic eschatological section of St. Matthew's Gospel. So it's it's very intense, and of course we're preparing for the Lord's Passion. Another thing that's done in the monasteries, in some places also in parishes even, is they'll read through all 4 Gospels during the day. Matthew on Monday, Mark on Tuesday, Luke on Wednesday, and John on Thursday. This is on top of 8 hours of services. So, and in those services, there's plenty of orthoaerobics, meaning prostrations. Now, do you all know how to do prostrations?
Any demonstration?
Yeah. I can't get down on my knees, so let's hope this.
So, the first of which is just, people come up and typically venerate, okay? But to do a veneration all the way down to the floor is one. But correct me if I'm wrong on this, but during the weekdays when there's a liturgy, the proper thing to do is a full prostration, okay? Which a lot of times what I'll see people do in a Russian church, they use their fists, okay? You take your fists, you'll put them down to the ground, you'll take yourself all the way down, and then lift yourself back up. So kind of like this, down, and then back up.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't spring quite up as I used to 20 years ago, but that's kind of the idea. So
Forehead to the
three
floor.
different levels of veneration that we do, but again, on liturgy days that are not on Sunday. And you never do a prostration like that on Sunday with
Saturdays and Sundays, no.
Saturdays or Sundays. Yeah.
Sunday especially. Actually, during Lent, it's very proper to when you venerate the icon, instead of doing just a metania, a bow, where you touch the floor, is that you do 2 prostrations before the icon, kiss the icon, then do a 3rd prostration as you go around to all the icons and do the same thing. Now, things have gotten much easier over the course of the centuries. There's a book that was published in the 16th century called the Domistry, and it was all about how to have an Orthodox household. And so it prescribed the whole family getting together, doing the evening prayers, and then doing 400 prostrations together. This is, for example, the kind of discipline that Saint Sergius of Rodnish grew up with. The whole family, little kids as well as adults, doing the full prostrations, hundreds of them together. So that kind of ended. That didn't last that long. But people will still, during their prayers, do prostrations together as a family. So there's a Lenten prayer. He's talking tonight. And it's the prayer of Saint Ephrem the Syrian. So it's the 3rd century, but has been very popular and used liturgically in the church for 1600 years probably, 1700 years. The prayer is, O Lord and Master of my life, take from me the spirit of sloth, despair, lust of power, and idle talk. Full prostration. Then back up. But give rather the spirit of chastity, humility, patience, and love to thy servant. Full prostration. And up. Yea, O Lord and King, grant that I may see my own sins and not judge my brother. For blessed art thou unto ages of ages. Amen. Full prostration. Then you say, you do metanias, you bow, you make the sign of the cross and bow, touch the floor. You do 12 of those. Have mercy on me, a sinner.
Yeah.
Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. What's that?
Want me to read them off for you?
Well, no, it's just, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner.
Okay, yeah, I got like a slightly different version.
Yeah, there's all sorts of versions. And then at the end you do the prayer all together. Lord and Master of my life, take from me the spirit of sloth, despair, lust of power, and idle talk, but give rather the spirit of chastity, humility, patience, and love to thy servant. Yea, O Lord and King, grant that I may see my own sins and not judge my brother, for blessed art thou unto ages of ages. Full prostration. So it keeps the blood flowing. And if you're young and healthy, it's a really good thing because it keeps your attention.
So I was wondering, so when you're doing a prostration, the proper way to do it is the way you demonstrated.
Mm-hmm.
So if people were to do because I've heard people doing like hundreds of prostrations a day,
Mm-hmm.
they do them like that.
Pretty much. Some people won't go all the way down, but the idea is that you put your forehead to the floor.
Because, I don't know, I guess I was doing them wrong, because I wasn't getting up off the ground, just staying on my knees.
No.
Oh, okay. I was
That's
doing
cheating.
Cheating, yeah, very much cheating.
Yeah. Now the point is, go down and up and down and up. Now, especially when you're doing large numbers of prostrations, 50 or 100 or whatever, and that's a normal thing as a prayer rule in a prayer rule, is to for the spiritual father to give a discipline of 50 prostrations a night, and then you just go down onto your hands. Your knees barely touch the floor, and you just spring back up, and it's down and up and down and up and down and up. Sign of the cross, and then so. Mm-hmm.
If you don't mind me just adding a little bit to this, this is actually very normal. Okay, just every Orthodox church, this isn't something like just folklore.
No.
Okay, almost every Orthodox church that I've ever been to, I've been to Faith of Russian, I've been to Greek, and to many monasteries. This is very Orthodox across the board. The prayer that I'm saying that from the sermon, to kind of sort of end your prayer, and once you get used to it, it's just it's very normal to do. You just kind of expect to do it, so. And you'll see this throughout the whole Lenten period, just emphasizing that's just like a signature Orthodox thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great prayer. I mean, I actually first discovered it because a Roman Catholic professor at my college prays it every day and recommended it to me soon after I met him. It's beautiful.
With prostrations?
Not with prostrations, no. Although he did have Orthodox icons all over his office because students would give them to him.
So, orthoaerobics.
So with Greek Orthodox churches, like when I go down to Chesapeake, Virginia, like my family down there, I don't think there's any Roquefort churches. Is that okay to go to those?
Yeah. Where is it?
Down in Chesapeake, Virginia.
Okay.
Right
Yeah.
next to Virginia Beach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if there's not a Roquefort church, you can go to the other canonical churches. Right now, the Russians are having a spat with the Greeks, or the Greeks are having a spat with the Russians, or one of the two.
I was seeing something, I was gonna ask you about that
Yeah.
as well, like, I think it was like the Patriarch of Constantinople, and something with the Pope, I wasn't really sure what was going on with it.
Yeah, it's well, that's only part of it. It's a much longer thing about Ukraine. And Patriarch of Constantinople invaded the territory of the Russian Orthodox Church and created a schism, and which is uncanonical, to say the least. And so, but yeah, it's all politics, and well, it's not politics that Russia was offended that they went into their territory and created the schism and created which is the fake church in Ukraine. So the Russian church is out of communion with the Greek church, with the Patriarch of Constantinople.
That's what I was asking about, like with visiting those like Greek Orthodox churches, because I heard something about that. Like I don't know, like all the like.
Well, if you want to be real strict about it, we're trying to keep it off the lay level, because in America we're a single Orthodox community. People go to the church of their taste. So you wake up. Someday you might feel like hearing Byzantine chant. Another day you might feel like you want to hear Russian chant. Another day you might want to hear, go to a convert parish, which where they're just trying to figure out, things from the beginning. So, and people go around to different churches. Now, it's also another thing too, and this is one of the big differences between Orthodoxy in America and Orthodoxy in the old countries, is that they don't have the idea of belonging to a parish. A parish is simply a liturgical center of the diocese. There's no community attached to the parish, aside from maybe the priests and the deacons and the choir director, the people who keep the place running. But in Europe, people go. Maybe they like the preacher at one place, they like the choir at another place, they like the icons better, so they'll make their rounds, maybe somebody's spiritual father is at one place and they have friends in another, and that's just, and people go around. There are a couple of parishes that I know of in Moscow that actually were experimenting with having an actual community attached. One of which had an American priest who was the OCA's representative to the Patriarch. And so he started the absolutely unheard of thing in the Russian church, coffee hour. They don't do coffee hour. People come to church, they go to liturgy, and they leave. And they may or may not have friends there. But in America, our churches have communities. And we've adopted an American style of parish life. But in Russia, it's unheard of that you belong to a parish. And you drop your donation wherever you happen to go that week. Yeah.
I started up in Pittsburgh, and there are just hundreds of Orthodox churches in Pennsylvania and particularly in the Pittsburgh area. And we had a Lenten thing where we, on nights where there was a pre-sanctified, or we would go to a different parish. And so 5 or 10 parishes would all show up at that one, and they would host some kind of Lenten meal after pre-sanctified. So that experience of going around to all of these, and some of them were just so much different than one that, you know, that I called home. And to see all of those, it was fascinating.
Yeah, some of those churches in the Rust Belt, where Orthodoxy is the oldest, or at least much older than like the suburbs, where the churches were built around 1900 to into the 1920s. Some of them are massive. They hold, 1,000 people. And the newer churches from the 70s and 80s tend to be smaller, not smaller. Now I think we're going to have another growth spurt in large churches, but it's worth seeing those churches. Greek churches tend to be there are Greek churches that are much larger. And there are some very large Russian churches as well. There's one in Howell, New Jersey, which is magnificent, except it's located right on the border of the Hasidic Jewish neighborhood. So you drive through the neighborhood, and there's all these people with all their in the evening, like with the lights on bright, and all of the curtains open, so that you can be sure to see that they're doing their prayers. And they, and the families will walk around the neighborhood because they have a rope going around the entire neighborhood, which means it's inside. You can go as far as you want, as long as you're inside. And there's whole neighborhoods in Brooklyn that are like that, and in Rockland County, New York. Those are Hasidic strongholds. They don't like Christians though. So, but this huge cathedral is right there, right on the main road going through Howell, New Jersey. And we've got a huge cathedral in San Francisco. New York, it's the Moscow Patriarchate that has the huge Russian Orthodox cathedral. 600-700 people would easily fit in there. In Washington, it's the Greek cathedral, of course. It's the largest, St. Sophia. So, anyway. Questions?
I'll break in with one or two else. You have something?
Yeah, somebody had told me that there are, I don't know what the word is, but there's 16 Romanian saints, new Romanian saints, Orthodox saints. Do you know anything about that?
I know there are a bunch of new saints that I don't know who all they are. One of them, I believe, is Father George Calciu, who served he was in the Romanian Gulag, and then he was rescued by the Americans and brought here. There was a group headed by Father Victor Potapov, who's the dean of the cathedral in Washington, and included people like Marilyn Sweezy, who's the little tiny old lady who comes, babushka, and it was a committee for the Defense of Orthodox Christians, and so they collaborated in freeing people from Russia, from Serbia, from Romania during the communist period. Marilyn also worked with Bishop Basil Rodzianko, who had been in the Serbian Gulag in the 40s, and he was ultimately rescued by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and was given a Serbian parish in London. In the Russian, Ukrainian, Serbian, Romanian Bulgarian community, I don't know how much. You've got these tremendous stories of people who survived the gulags, and some. I'm sure there are people at St. John's in D.C. Who walked from Moscow to China to escape. Walked, if you can imagine. Some of them went over the Himalayas. Some of them went over just amazing stories. When I first entered the church, my first encounter with an OCA priest was this old Latvian priest. I think I told you about him. He was the one who gave me the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was, as great important Orthodox literature. You must believe this. You must read this. You must understand. Hitler was right. I thought, oh my God, I go into a Russian Orthodox church. I don't find communists, I find Nazis. So anyway, but there was this whole group that after the Second World War, they emigrated to the United States. They were mostly Latvian priests, part of Roquefort, and there were like 6 or 7 of them that ended up in the San Francisco diocese of the OCA, and I knew several of them. But they had been the priests who had followed the victorious troops of the Third Reich into Western Russia and reopened churches, because the churches had been shut, vandalized, and the priests had been shot by the communists. And so the people welcomed them as liberators. One man's liberator is another man's enemy. So it's very, very interesting. It's so easy to project our evaluations of people and politics. Hey, Nick, how are you?
Okay.
Into the past, and it's completely unfair. If you're a guy in your 20s or 30s, in the 1930s, in Eastern Europe, you had 2 choices: Nazi or communist. One of the 2. There's no in between. And so what do? The Nazis were not anti-Christian. In fact, they supported the church. Whereas the communists, of course, were rabidly anti-Christian, and there's this massive persecution of the Christians in Russia, so that there were 20 million martyrs in the last century. 20 million martyrs, not just people who died in the wars and things like that. There were the Bolshevik Jewish, famines. There was the first one you don't hear about so much. Was in if you had Moscow here, it went in a kind of cone to the east. And there were 6 million people that died because they went in, they confiscated all the food, all the animals, all the grain, all the seed stores. So the people were left with literally nothing to eat. That was the first one. The second one was in Ukraine in the 20s, or in the 30s, 1931, 32. And 12 million people died. And these were the Bolsheviks again. So, my guess is that this was part of why Stalin purged the Jews from the Communist Party, because they were slaughtering Russians.
Bobby.
Mm-hmm.
What do you know of Dietrich Bonhoeffer and his movement? The Lutherans that didn't go to the Nazis?
I've read a little bit. I don't really know enough to address it. He was in Romania. Romania?
No, he was German.
Oh, he was. I know he was
He
German.
was German. He got smuggled to the U.S. and then he went back. He started what was basically, they called themselves the Confessing Lutherans.
Uh-huh.
Hitler had plans for sort of reshaping the Lutheran Church into, like, using the Christian symbols to create a political and social organization, just to make it one more, society that's goal was patriotism.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like if you read his plans for Lutheran churches, by the end of it, there'd be a sword on the altar and a flag right behind it. Right,
Yeah.
like he wasn't exactly a fan of Christianity because it was Christian, but because it had social power.
Right. Exactly.
And the Nazi state church, right, because most of the Lutheran confessional churches are state churches, was not exactly supported because it was Christian. It was tolerated because it wasn't.
Right.
So I was the statement that your choices were Nazis and communists and that the Nazis were pro-church. I don't think is entirely true.
Well, that's not. I believe me. It's that's the way it was explained to me by people who were there.
Yeah.
And you had to be a special kind of person to go into the resistance.
That's true.
And the Russian Orthodox Church was a state church under the Third Reich, and in Germany still is a state church, Rochor. And so it's, but whenever you get this mix between politics and religion, and we've got plenty of it too. It's very interesting. This whole thing. There's a whole series of videos from a producer called Versefire on YouTube, and what it talks about is the development of Christian Zionism, which was essentially a government attempt to manipulate the Christian community to supporting Israel. And collaboration, of course, between the U.S. government and between the State Department and Mossad, and the bankers in Europe. So we've got it too. The evangelicals probably didn't realize that they were part of a state-engineered political religious hybrid. So anyway, enough for politics. What other questions?
So I'd like to have you address something that we'll probably expound on a little bit more this week, but and you and I touched a little bit on it today, but I'd like to talk a little bit about zealotry. And in particular, the fact, kind of from an authoritative standpoint, we have quotes from saints. We have quotes, that come from fairly widely recognized, theological writers, and people that are, at your level, okay, that they kind of have a tendency to really strictly interpret things without any latitude left or right, more as kind of like rules and laws and expression of canon and all of that. I want to try to see about toning some of that down a little bit. How
absolutely.
should we understand that in terms of us as lay people dealing with writings from a saint, for example, writings from church officials?
Well, there's a number of things that are, points that need to be made on that. Orthodoxy is not legalistic. It's anything but. There's all sorts of guidelines and rules and canons and all of that stuff. But the understanding of what a canon is, or a rule is that it's a ruler by which you measure your progress. And so what the canons are, what the fasting rules, for example, other kinds of rules, it's the highest. In other words, it's a kind of maximalist expression of what would be the ideal practice. Something that you can, and the bar is set so high that basically you can only, you probably will never reach the bar. Never reach, and that's all right. A law, there's a difference between a ruler where you can say, oh, my performance is 50% or 70% or 90% or 5%, or whatever. But still, there's that bar, and by which you determine, how good your practice is. And the fundamental rule underneath all of it is you never, ever look at what somebody else is doing or try and evaluate somebody else. Ever. That is pure sin. Why? Because it's all ego. And one of the most difficult problems for new converts is they get all excited about all of this stuff and look, I don't have to think. All I need to do is follow the rules, And the Roman Catholics exploited this, very strongly, So they got more rules than they have dogmas, which is amazing. Where everything is defined, and in doing so, they defined themselves into a whole. So far as the rules go, what they did and what the Orthodox zealots do is they make us into new Pharisees. Look at me, I fast twice a week. I give 10% of everything that I have to the church. So, somebody might fast twice a week, but are you giving 10% of everything? I doubt it. I see the figures. Actually, I don't see the figures. I make it a point not to look and see what anybody is donating. But if everyone would tithe, we would have a lot more in our. We wouldn't have to do fundraisers. And it's this way with fasting. It's this way with church attendance. It's this way. Number of prostrations that you're doing in your prayer rule, how you do your prayer rule, which is completely private. You do your prayer rule in your room with the door shut, right? In your closet, as it says in the, I think, King James translation. And then there are those who have suddenly become not only the great masters of all of the discipline, but of the dogmas, and then they go and decide to measure everybody's orthodoxy. Well, 95% of the time, they don't understand what they're talking about. And that's a real problem. I think you all know that I forbid people from watching Peter Hears on YouTube. And one of the things is, and I've known Peter since he was 20, okay? He stayed with me for a while. Okay, I know the guy pretty well. I've got stories. Typical what you'd expect for a 20-year-old, you know. But he doesn't, like with this whole issue of converts and baptism. He himself, thank God, did not say this, but some of his people were going around and saying that even if you were received into the Orthodox Church 30 years ago by chrismation, you have been taking communion unto damnation because it's not legitimate. So, who is he to say that something that all the bishops over the past 1,600 years have said, no, this is the way we receive people in different ways. There's baptism, there's chrismation, and there's even confession of faith. If you go to some of the other jurisdictions, if you're Roman Catholic, you may be received by confession of faith, not even chrismation. If you're a Protestant or a non-confirmed Roman Catholic, you'd be chrismated. But if you're a heretic or a Jew or a pagan, you'd be received by baptism. ROCOR doesn't do that. ROCOR's policy is to baptize everybody, because one of the things that happens now is that you get this happens more like with Methodists very often. You know, they'll have a baptismal certificate that says so and so was baptized in the name of in water in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Okay, that satisfies the requirement, right? But you know, the woman who administers the baptism, you know, she may say the mother, the lover, and the child, or whatever. You know, the lesbian trinity, or something else. The creator, redeemer, and sanctifier. There's no baptism there. There's no baptism. It's just a bath. And you get that in the Roman Catholic Church too. So anybody who was baptized after 1970 or thereabouts, are you really sure you were baptized in the name of the Trinity in the Protestant or Catholic churches? So we tend to baptize everyone, and if somebody objects to that, we will do a conditional baptism. That means if so and so is not baptized, they are now baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They were never immersed anyway. 95%. So, and Protestant evangelical baptism. How can you equate the church's baptism with Pastor Billy Bob in the slough? You know, you can't. It's not the church's baptism, because there's nothing of the church in those communities, and there's not a shred of apostolic tradition. Well, the Bible's the only shred of apostolic tradition, but they can't understand that. So we got he wrote this book which talks about the consensus of the Holy Fathers. Well, so far as and it was all about the theology of Saint Cyprian of Carthage. Saint Cyprian of Carthage died around the year 225 or 240, something like that, and he was very strict, because at that time you had a heresy that the church was being afflicted by, but and there were those who wanted to receive them when they converted by chrismation. But Cyprian said, no, the only acceptable way of receiving a heretic who has betrayed the faith is by baptism, or never had the faith in the first place. So his argument is that over the course of the centuries, the consensus of he conveniently ignores huge amounts of conciliar material, in other words, from councils of bishops. And he finally, what it comes down to is his consensus of the Holy Fathers is a bunch of right-wing academics who hang out on the Holy Mountain with some crazy old monks. That's not the consensus of the Fathers. That's a bunch of old guys hanging out and, talking about religion. Consensus of the Fathers means the consensus of bishops, of councils, ecumenical and otherwise, over the course of the centuries, where they speak with one mind. So that includes, just the local councils of bishops, which meet twice a year in each jurisdiction. So he's got some problems in his theology. He's basically doesn't support episcopal authority, and there's only one word for that in Orthodox vocabulary, and that's Protestant. If you don't believe in bishops, you're a Protestant. I don't care what it looks like, what it smells like, how high, all the smells and bells and all that stuff. But what it created was this whole, and it fed into young zealots. Young zealots, many of them catechumens, were going around and judging the orthodoxy of everybody else according to this, fraudulent terminology and fraudulent criteria, and it was creating chaos. Peter's my old friend, but I literally do not know of any other priest in the past 500 years at least who's created more controversy and more pain in the Orthodox Church than Peter Hears. And it's quite an achievement of his that he got banned from preaching, teaching, and celebrating the Eucharist in all of North America by all of the bishops of all of the jurisdictions. To get that kind of consensus that all of the bishops of all of the jurisdictions in North America would forbid him from ministering as a priest.
Who is it?
Peter Hears.
H-E-R-R.
Heers. He's got a
Orthodox ethos.
Orthodox ethos, and it's no. So this is something I absolutely forbid, actually, because it leads to all sorts of zealotry that's misunderstood. Now, the Holy Fathers, in particular, Saint Isaac the Syrian, and then later fathers. There have been many fathers in between who've written on that. Isaac the Syrian in the 8th century, all the way to Saint Ignatius Bryanchaninov in the 19th century, and then into the 20th century, have written about zealotry. And what it really is, it's based on a shallow understanding by people who are not mature enough to have discernment. You usually don't get discernment until you've been in this for at least 20 some years.
So at least,
20 years. So, if you're, you were baptized when?
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. So, you're 2 weeks old. Okay?
I mean, Father Lexi mentioned it last night. We were talking about the monks hiking through Virginia, and he said, we don't always have to have an opinion about everything,
Right.
a stance on everything, and kind of felt a relief. Like, sometimes I just don't care, and I hope that's okay that I don't care sometimes about what everyone is saying and having an opinion. Just being fine with reading my Bible, not even looking up and out, just focusing on what I'm focusing on.
And focus on yourself and your own faith and your own practice, not on anybody else's. Because what happens with zealotry is you get a little bit of knowledge, and then you start to judge everybody according to that little bit of knowledge, not understanding how the church applies those rules. And it's certainly not the job of any layman, much less a neophyte, much less a catechumen, to judge anyone else. As an Orthodox Christian, it's not anybody's job to judge anyone else. So you don't say, oh, this person isn't Orthodox, because they don't believe Peter hears, to use an example. Well, you can be very unorthodox, and if you believe Peter hears too. And what it does is it operates it's entirely out of the ego, because people don't. It takes years to develop noetic awareness, noetic consciousness, and to develop discernment, which is noetic consciousness, and also a very solid education when it comes down to dogmas and canons and things like that, and the theology and the structure of the church. You have to know all of that stuff before you make any kind of discernment. And it's interesting. I have a friend who's a canonist. He's like the main canonist for the Greek Church, and he doesn't. He'll write out an evaluation of a case, but he says he submits it for the discernment of the bishop, and that's it. He doesn't make a judgment. He doesn't. He'll list, well, these canons are apparently broken. List the canons. For a church court. Do you know there's a church court? Okay, yeah.
similar was,
Yeah.
But they have it at multiple levels too, right? Like the synodical and.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a level for bishops, a level for lower clergy, and then things like divorce usually get handled by a canonist who's employed by the diocese to adjudicate.
On the particular response last night, Father Lexi and I seemed very much eye to eye. You don't have to have an opinion on everything. However, from my experience, 33 years experience as Orthodox, when I see something that impulsively I do take an opinion on, or feel like the next words out of my mouth is going to be a judgment, I usually recognize at that point to internalize that and look at myself. Because if I have observed something and I'm recognizing that, tells me that is probably an opportunity that God is trying to expose something within myself. As I find often in the past when I have been judgmental, that here, as soon as I come down on something, I'm judgmental about it, I walk away 5 minutes later, I find myself doing something very similar, okay? And I didn't take that opportunity as a teaching lesson to myself. And I brought up an issue last night about St. Gregory of Palamas, who talks about this kind of circling back on our this awareness, okay, we have five senses, we do observe the world, we see things, the ebb and flow of what's going on in the world, but internalizing, bringing that back inside and evaluating yourself, searching out, the hidden things within our own heart, within our own being, is really where that's supposed to be, not about judging others. And if you don't have an opinion, if you don't find yourself judgmental, that's okay too.
It's actually much better.
Yeah.
There's a story in the Desert Fathers about this one monk, and he lived kind of a lax life. He wasn't too observant so far as all the rules and the fasting, and just kind of lax life. And then he was dying, and so the fathers they were a little scandalized by his laxity, but he said, I know I haven't been obedient to the rules, but I've never judged anyone.
If I recall that exact story, that's one of my favorite Desert Fathers.
Mm-hmm.
But if I remember the story from the version that I read it from,
Mm-hmm.
all the brothers were standing around
Right.
him. He's dying on the bed, and they're like, well, you ate chicken when it was, Friday, and you did this and you did that, and then finally he takes his last breath after everybody has accused him, and the abbot turns around at them and says, because the abbot's aware of all his confessions and everything in his life, he never once judged anybody. And then he reminded them of the judge not, and you shall not be judged. And all the other brothers were like, at that point, heads down, realizing how judgmental they were.
Right.
And
Because judging
all the things he did, probably down to that 1 or 2 or maybe to 5% of being able to meet the bar of the fasting rules or whatever was there. He never judged anybody else, and therefore he will not be judged before Christ.
Yeah, judgment is a grave sin. Breaking the fasting rules is not. If you judge and you condemn somebody, then what you're doing is you're setting yourself up for condemnation. Yeah.
No, but is this Peter Hughes, Father Peter Hughes? This person?
Oh yeah.
So I've actually seen videos of him. I didn't know that he was controversial.
Oh.
So he can't.
He's made he's controversial worldwide, throughout the entire Orthodox world.
For what?
It just shows how subtle heresy can be.
Yeah. Well, because his in his teaching, he ultimately ends up anti-episcopal.
He doesn't have a bishop that he falls under, does he?
No, there's no bishop will have him
Which
in the
is
entire Orthodox world.
Yeah.
Why?
Because he's arrogant, and he refuses correction.
So he's teaching, but without any.
He's teaching against the express will of the bishops of North America. He got all of the bishops. He's a unique case. All of the bishops of North America, the entire, there's like 120, 150 bishops in North America, have forbidden him from teaching or acting as a priest. Okay? In Greece, he was part of the Church of Greece for a while.
Right. Yeah,
He is even the bishop where he initially was won't have him. So, without a bishop, you're not a priest.
Therein lies a great rule to make sure for the rest of your Orthodox life. If the priest that is serving at a church does not fall under a bishop, whereas 150 bishops against them. walk away.
Yeah. Yeah, a priest without a bishop is just a guy.
Exactly.
You know, I used to watch some of his videos when I first was starting Orthodoxy, and if like you really pay attention to the message of most of his videos, they're mainly just judging other people.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the main like content that he makes is just judging other people, and that's it's something that was it's interesting because before that I did like his videos, but then I started noticing that, and then now hearing you say that, I stopped watching him, and then now hearing you say that's very. I didn't know that he was banned from North America and all that.
Mm-hmm.
It brings up a curious question. Does he have an mention? I mean, how does he serve?
No, he doesn't.
How does he serve communion?
He doesn't. He's forbidden.
Okay.
And if
So he's not doing that in addition to all the other things
he's not serving as a priest.
Okay.
He's in a Orthodox community,
Yeah.
but he's forbidden to serve as a priest. And if he were to serve as a priest, the canons provide that if a clergyman who's under suspension or something like that serves without a bishop's blessing, he's defrocked. So yeah, there's a huge most of the canons are disciplinary. But one of the big mistakes new converts get into, especially those who are into legalism, is they get the book of the canons.
Mm-hmm.
There's one version of it called the Rudder,
Mm-hmm.
which has some pretty problematic commentary on it, and then they start judging everyone and everything according to.
Guilty as charged. I mean, my first 3 years as Orthodox. Get the rudder, man. I thought I knew it all reading the rudder the first time. Wow.
Yeah.
You know, you gotta be very careful.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the principles of Orthodox canons is that it's the bishop's priority alone to interpret the canons for in any kind of canonical procedure. Not a parish priest, not a bunch of laymen, the bishop alone. And bishops are supposed to be trained in doing that. Some are, some aren't. The principle of applying the canons is called economia. Economia means household management. And so it's the bishop's job to manage the household, right, of the church. And so it's a very important task to be able to know the canons and to be able to discern, you know, if there's what kind of infraction there is, or what kind of if there's somebody has done something, which canons apply, because some of them are pretty vague. And some of the canons determine, I mean, they determine the relationship between the emperor and the church in certain things, and well, it's not exactly relevant right now. So, does this make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to make sure that everybody realizes that, you know, the Orthodox Church is seen as like a hospital, and we've got people coming in with all kinds of, you know, injuries and whatever, and many good doctors, and people that attend to, you know, to all of that, and just realize that even though, you know, we run across, even within the Orthodox Church, those who are judgmental, or who, you know, like to legalize because they just cannot see love and forgiveness as easy as they can see a rule, okay? just understand it as part and parcel of us all, you know, trying to achieve that goal of, you know, and for some of us, it's a real struggle. Others are deeply challenged by it, you know, and challenge it. So there's a lot of that going on. We don't walk away from, you know, the Judas being amongst us, or also the other 11 that had disputes with one another, okay, that ultimately they brought to healing, okay? So this all exists from the beginning of the church, even with Christ present, to now. We still have all of that, but what we need to do is to extend love, forgiveness, and non-judgmentalness towards everything. So if you pick something up, or somebody posts something that sounds, you know, I actually had a couple of phone calls on my way up here from the monastery. People really troubled by that last night. So just be aware that when you see something like that, you know, apply those 3 rules: love, forgiveness, non-judgmentalness to everything. Okay, and you walk a much more profound walk with Christ, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Deke, it seems like there's like a really big temptation for converts in approaching how they speak about orthodoxy, because I feel like that's like the time where most people in your life are wondering, like, why are you going down this path? And you have such little knowledge, but you want to explain why, and then it's like you don't want to like not explain it to them, but like, I feel like once you become Orthodox, maybe less people kind of come at you at different angles on trying to pick apart it. And when you're a catechumen, like that's when everyone's coming at you. So how do you really like approach that?
It's a challenge.
Right.
I think the main thing is that when we explain why are we becoming Orthodox, it's not a good thing to argue with your family, especially, or your extended family, or your friends, and tell them that they're wrong, that they're going to hell, and they're going to, their church is, synagogue of Satan, and on and on, that doesn't help, especially if it's the church that you grew up in. You need to respect and give thanks for the background that you have, because that's where you probably came to faith, right? And so even if it has all sorts of problems, and there's all churches have problems. Some have bigger problems because they're, for various reasons. I think the best thing is when somebody asks, why are you becoming Orthodox? Because you feel that this is where Christ is calling you to be. Which should be true, right? That this is where you need, the context in which you need, that you need to be faithful to Christ. Who's going to argue with that?
I will say that one of the things that I run into often is there's a difference between a genuine question as to why you are, going down the path of Orthodox, and one that's not genuine. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody has a financial, or somebody, may have other reasons to really hit you again and again and again and not let go from the issue. That's an issue they're having. Okay, you need to, as Ladika says, it should just be that simple of an answer. This is where Christ is calling me. Well, but wait a minute, if you go down that path, you're going to hell. That's not genuine at that point. Okay, it really isn't. They're not concerned about, maybe trying to understand, maybe doing it out of love. So be able to separate that right from the start. Is this a genuine question? Somebody really loves me, is asking me, maybe trying to understand? Or are they immediately jumping into judgment on you? At that point, it's just gonna become an argument because they don't wanna hear anything. They want you to.
And they're not interested in hearing about the church, about orthodoxy. They're not interested in, and historically it's, you can't argue with the historicity of the Orthodox Church. You can't argue with the integrity of the doctrine from the ecumenical councils on. You can't argue with the depth of the spirituality. You can't argue, and it's hard. How do you argue against the aesthetics? And okay, these Protestants may not like icons, except they all have statues of Mary on Christmas. It's a lot of it is just propaganda that they've been told as a way they think to argue against orthodoxy. But quite frankly, I mean, we can defend every position, but why should we have to defend it? It's they who have to defend, their shall we say, creative approach to church life. Which is not apostolic.
I feel like, especially once you bring up like the history of the church and like saying like this is the church that you find in the Bible, like this is the same church, and like also the fact that Protestantism was the result of Catholicism changing so much, and so Orthodoxy didn't change. So you kind of already had the answer, and then you kind of just made your own answer.
Yeah.
Once you get to that point in the conversation and they still don't want to hear anything about it, it's kind of just like wasting your time.
Yeah.
And I just recently had an experience with somebody from the church I was going to. When I was younger, I was raised Seventh-day Adventist. And so it got to that point, and when I brought that up, he kind of just stayed silent. And then he was just like, but whatever, you're always going to be Adventist. And I was like, what? He was like, no, like I'm not though. And he was like, no, you are. You're Adventist. Like, so at that point, it's just really not about them wanting to learn about why you become Orthodox. It's just, I really don't even understand what it was about. But he couldn't let that go, and I was like, all right, I'll talk to you later. Like, I'm Orthodox, and we can still be friends. Well, I'm trying to be Orthodox, and we can still be friends, but you just didn't want to have it. He was like, no, you're always Adventist. No matter what you say, you're still going to be an Adventist.
It has well, at least it has a much longer tradition than a lot of modern churches.
Sure.
With, 150 years? Thereabouts?
I don't even know how old that is. It started like 1844 after this huge mistake they made.
Yeah. So, what can you say to that? Somebody who's convinced of their opinion.
Yeah, you can't. You just gotta walk away.
Yeah. It's not a good idea to tear down the other person's church. You can say, I'm here because I'm finding what I need for my spiritual life, which is true. And theologically, the deeper you get, the more you'll find. But if your family, for example, if they see that it's making you kinder, gentler, more generous, more patient, more Christ-like, they'll know that you're in a good place. But if it makes you if they experience you as angry and judgmental and arrogant and all of this other stuff, they'll say, well, this kind of a cult is that, So it's very important to remember that, that ultimately this is all about Jesus Christ and being a follower of Jesus Christ. It's not about being a member of the organization. It's not about, signing up for the ideology or to go to a free concert every Sunday,
That's a very interesting point, because orthodoxy is not about correct location
Right.
or correct name or, correct identity. It's about correct thinking,
Mhm.
correct. So which is more like I want to say more like, we use it as a noun, but it's more like a verb in a sense. Okay. So.
Yeah. And an adjective.
Mhm.
But we need to treat orthodoxy as a verb. Doing orthodox, being orthodox. Orthodoxing, I guess you would call it, right? Living in a way that you conform your life. It's interesting. So many of the other churches, they have this idea that they'll modernize the church to make it, so you change the church so it's familiar to people and it's easy for them to enter in, and they understand, adapt the church to them. Our approach is, you have to adapt yourself to the church. You have to change your mind, you have to change your behavior, you have to change your lifestyle, you have to change everything, and not expect the church to adapt to you, which we don't do. So. What else?
Last, I think like 2 Sundays ago over the Zoom call, we were talking about your experience in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
I think you had briefly mentioned somewhere along the whole timeline that you had met Seraphim Rose.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind speaking about that?
Yeah, well, I converted when I was 19, in my sophomore year at University of California, San Diego. Then in this summer, the following summer, I took that was sophomore, junior. I went up to UC Santa Cruz. I was in the Russian immersion program in the summertime, and then the semester started. And then I went to, there was this monk, Ira monk, that I became got to know, and he became my spiritual father briefly. And the bishop sent us, the priest monk, myself, and one of my buddies, to a monastery to see if we could help out, because it needed a dose of young male energy, and a lot of young male energy, but there was a priest and 2 nuns there. It had been a women's monastery, but the abbess was 89, and the other nun, who didn't speak any English, she was Russian and an old believer at that. You asked her, and she said, "Well, I turned 100 a long time ago, but I forgot when." And so she would be sweeping the paths every day, and she'd get up on the roof and sweep the roof, 100-year-old lady, and she was very funny. Anyway, long story. And then there was a priest who was 99, and he had been a vaudevillian, performer. And then after he became a priest, he got a van, and built it out so that in the back of the truck was an altar. And so all we would have to do is open up the doors, And, you know, just pull up and open up the doors and there's instant church, right? And he would go around to the Indian reservations because California was the location of a bunch of the Indian schools, especially for the West Coast, especially for Alaska. And so all the kids were Orthodox. So he was a crotchety old guy, he served with a walker, so he'd sit down with a walker and he'd move around slowly, but it was very frustrating. And so the abbess was his altar server. In a women's monastery, women serve in the altar, and so he'd get all frustrated and say, "Oh, kadila, kadila," which means incense, incense. And she was great. She would just go, eh. It was great. So after a few weeks, he sent us up to Platina for the feast of St. John the Baptist. And that's when I had a chance to get to know Father Seraphim. Met Father Herman there too. But spent a lot of time talking with Father Seraphim Rose. And then he and I continued to correspond. And one of the things he told me was not to go into ROCOR. I was ready to go into ROCOR at that time.
Who said that?
Father Seraphim Rose.
He was ROCOR, wasn't
He was ROCOR, well, yeah. And but he said, "Oh, you're fine where you are." It was interesting.
Did you know that the Father Deacon John Cabin took care of Father Herman?
Yeah, you told me about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, later on that year, I was in a world religion class. I was a TA, and so all the TAs had a section. Well, I did a section on Orthodoxy, right? So I decided to invite Father Seraphim Rose down to UC Santa Cruz to give a lecture. And that was a very important lecture. It's printed as God's Revelation to the Human Heart, and it's on YouTube and all this other stuff. And I'm on the recording, by the way. Yeah, I'm not by name, of course, but and so that was very good, very fruitful, and that's he was a good, faithful hieromonk. He was a faithful servant of ROCOR, and he was a faithful to his monastic discipline. And he had a hard road to hoe. He had all sorts of temptations trying to keep Father Herman on the straight and narrow. But we weren't part of that. One of the things that he complained about, though, or rather he didn't complain, he told me about, is that he said, we realized that we had created a monster. This whole convert movement, who are all the zealots and judging one another and condemning one another, and all of the polemics going back and forth with the old calendar Greeks, who were kind of half in ROCOR, half out, and Platina was in opposition to Transfiguration Monastery, and so they would, and he said, and this is a disaster. Because all they're doing is arguing about church politics, and so he didn't have any use for that, so that was my experience with Father Seraphim. I had long continued experience with St. Herman Monastery after that, and so that's a much longer story than the 10 minutes that we have. So,
I would say that just as important as contact he's had with Elder Ephraim and other very famous monasteries. I've always wondered, even myself, probably how many are going to end up being saints that you've rubbed shoulders with and have been in the presence of. that,
Yeah,
you know, the next 10, 20, 30 years.
yeah. Well, I think there's even some talk of Elder Ephraim being officially canonized. I mean, of, you know, an actual ecclesiastical movement to do that. And so, I mean, he was remarkable. I had my spiritual father is the abbot of Valon Monastery, and he wanted to meet with Elder Ephraim, and he was coming to visit. So we set up an evening with the elder, and we had 6 hours with him. This was before St. Anthony's existed. You know, back in the late 80s, Elder Ephraim was in the United States and was under Rocor. But he got called back to Greece, and they told him unless he ceased and desist, he would be defrocked. So he got into trouble for having left the supposedly left the Greek archdiocese without a blessing. But he was just responding to people's need for traditional monasticism. So we had, as I said, we had 6 hours with him. The difficulty was the conversation was going from Greek to English and English to Russian and Russian to English and English to Greek and Greek to English and English to Russian. There were 2 of us who were translators. I was the Russian translator. My friend, and priest's wife in Saratoga, was the Greek translator, and who had known Elder Ephraim a long time. And so that was a very quite a remarkable meeting. But he laid out his whole vision for Greek Orthodox monasticism in America over the course of those hours, and that was amazing, because nobody at the time had thought that he would end up creating 20 monasteries, and there are 20 huge monasteries. These are not little skeets.
But it's almost there's only 20 monasteries there's a lot of skeets and everything else, but only 20 monasteries on Athens, right?
Well, the great monasteries.
The great
that compose the Holy Community. But the largest, there's a couple that are Vadapeti and the Russian monastery, which have about 135 people. But a lot of them have 30, 40 people at the most, even 20. And the abbots form the Holy Kinot, I think, which it's like a governing council that governs all of the affairs of the Holy Mountain. So, yeah.
But you have a side question.
Uh-huh.
There's like a lot of Christians that have different views on Genesis and the creation story.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you briefly talked about this in like the span of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been briefly looking into it because I see there's somewhat of a controversy over it. And I'm kind of confused on how there could be a long period of time. And the reason I say that is because I know you mentioned like to look at the original language, so the Septuagint, and then the New Testament was written in Greek. So when I look at that and I see what the word for day is, I'm going to butcher, you probably pronounce it better, but it's like Homera.
Yeah.
And I take that in Genesis and then I apply it to other parts within Scripture, like Exodus, when God is commanding the Israelites, 6 days you rest, 7th day, 6 days you work, 7th day you rest. And that's like a literal 6 days, and the 7th day is like a literal rest day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's using the same word. Without logic, could you say that is a literal 6th day? And the reason I say this is because I feel like a lot of people stray away from Christianity because they go to like modern science. But I think a lot of this modern science is from like these people with these presuppositions that isn't for the glory of God. It's like packed in with a bunch of atheism. So I kind of stay away from that, and I don't know, I just feel like that same word is used in a literal sense someplace else. I don't know, what do you think about that?
I don't think you'll like mine.
Well, I'm just curious to see, because like I heard that, I'm like, oh, well, I don't know. So
We're not fundamentalists. We're absolutely not literalist fundamentalists. And that is a 19th century American phenomenon. That is, you want to talk about modernism, that's modernism. Okay? And because what it is, it's projecting our cultural understanding on a document that's 3,000 years old, where they had a rather different culture. It's also, and all the presuppositions of 20th century, 21st century American. So for example, we tend to think of documents, of historical documents, as literal chronicles of what exactly happened step by step by step by step. What you're dealing with Genesis, A, is poetry, B, it's the language of mythology. Mythology not in the sense of made-up stories, but using poetic and symbolic language and typological language. It's not to be understood literally, but rather it's an allegory. And it's important, there's, although quite frankly, it's not quoted very often in the rest of the Old Testament or the New. So there's not a lot of references to it. Also, there are two creation stories. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And so to understand it literally, you do violence to it. And if you think that the Genesis is a book of empirical history, in the sense that we understand empirical history in the 21st century, you're totally misunderstanding it. So I like God's answer to Job. Where were you when I created the heavens and the earth? In other words, who do you think you are that you can understand it? These are the great mysteries. Personally, God can. The important point, dogmatically, the critical point, is that God created the heavens and the earth, and all the different aspects of it. God created it. It comes from God. It was created by the Father through the Son in the Holy Spirit, by the Holy Spirit. And that's the dogma. How it was created, we can't know. So, if God wanted to create it all of a sudden in 7 or 6 days, he could do that. That's his, he has. But if he wanted to use billions at 4 billion years or something like that, which I tend to think is more correct, he could do that too. It doesn't say. And it's certainly not the dogma of the church that it's to be understood in a literal way. There are those zealot fundamentalist Orthodox who tend to tend to use modern evangelical creationism and some of its interpretations as if it was Orthodox dogma. That's not true. It's not true. Saying, oh, what is it? Intelligent. It's really intelligent design, and all that kind of stuff. Well, if God wanted to create it by snapping his fingers, he could. But if he wanted to use it for over the course of billions of years to bring about the world as it is, he could. I think it's really important to understand that what we're facing is a mystery beyond our ability to understand, and be open to whatever. So I disagree with Father Seraphim Rose on that. And actually, I've got the patriarch behind me, quite frankly. He wrote not too long ago that in no way is it necessary to understand the creation as having happened in 6 days, but rather it's a mystery. We can't know, and one of the things in our hubris and in our arrogance, which comes as a result of a rationalist approach, is that we think that we know. And we have to have that understand. We have to think that we understand it, and that we can understand it. But one of the essential things to understand Orthodox theology is there are mysteries, far more mysteries, that we are unable to begin to perceive and understand. And we just have to say, this is beyond me. It's beyond my ability to understand. So
I think the hardest struggle for me is like the way that when we talk about explaining like orthodoxy, he took the historical approach of Protestantism was a reform from Catholicism, and they're kind of heterodox in their views. So I take like this historical approach, and I'm like, well, would Christians have really like had this idea that like billions of years were inputted into Genesis? Would they have taken more of, well, this is what it reads, like in the Greek it says day, and in
Right.
Exodus it says day, like would they have taken a more day-by-day approach? So that's like the struggle, I feel
But quite frankly, who was there to record it?
St. Augustine doesn't interpret it literally. He says-
Oh, there are those ancient fathers that do. I don't. So that makes me a heretic. Well, okay, I'll accept that.
A number of fathers treat the whole first 6 to 10 chapters of Genesis allegorically.
Yeah.
Some of them go further, right? Some of them suggest that, like, the killing of the firstborn and some of the plagues in Egypt didn't literally happen because they were bothered by God's willingness to do that. Same with the flood.
I think that's like the struggle, because like I feel like it's such a controversy, because if there's like Genesis being allegorical or poetic, then like you could kind of question like what else is allegorical or poetic,
Well,
because
that's
there are
right.
a lot
There
of
are.
things that are
Huge.
But people might say, oh, the Virgin Mary, the Holy Theotokos, like I don't know, it's allegorical, like you're missing the symbolism there.
Well,
It's
and
like, no,
that's-
that's literal.
And that's where we have the tradition that says, and there are areas of the tradition in which don't provide an answer, or that say that this is a mystery that is beyond our understanding. I mean, when God Himself says it's a mystery beyond your understanding, as in Job 38, I think we kind of need to take Him seriously. And it's fine to have all of these explanations and stuff, but don't canonize them, because the church doesn't. And just because there's another thing that's really important too is that the Roman Catholics have an idea that if somebody's a canonized saint, therefore everything they wrote is infallible.
Right.
We don't. We absolutely do not share that opinion. Because every saint who's written anything, is ever written, has errors.
Right. And that's why you have
And
to-
some of them are huge errors.
Like I read that Saint Basil the Great, he viewed it as a day by day, but then you have to take in like the holistic view of all the saints within the church and see like what that consensus is.
Well, yeah, and then we're in the 21st century, and their understanding of things in the 4th century are going to be a little different. The other thing is that the Old Testament in particular, New Testament too, but the Old Testament is sacred history. It's not a history of events as they happened. It's a history of how God dealt with the world and how God dealt with human beings, and then with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and on and on and on. So for example, it says, I think is Matthew, the 14 generations from what?
14 to David, and from David.
Oh,
to-
thank Yeah,
Noah.
from David and 14 generations to the exile, and then 14 generations from the exile to Christ. Well, not all of the forefathers are necessarily in that 14. These are symbolic numbers. And the thing is, the scriptures are an extremely sophisticated document. And, literal history, empirical history like we have, that was not what mattered to people then. That's not what they read the scriptures for. They certainly would never treat it as a science textbook or a geology textbook or something. It was a theology textbook. And it had a literal meaning, it had an allegorical meaning, it had a typological meaning, it had moral meaning, it had, layers and layers and layers and layers. But it doesn't have a single meaning. It's all complex.
And to your point, Ladika, like in the book of Acts, where there's the eunuch and then the Apostle Philip is there, and he's like, how can I understand this unless someone teaches me?
Mhm.
It's really good to have like a bishop or a priest or somebody that could give you more of an understanding of it, so I appreciate
Mhm.
that.
Yeah,
So.
the-
Yep. Whoops. I'm the only priest too. Okay, let's pray. Does anybody not have one of these?